Let me tell y'all something. There's a moment in life when you try to knock somebody down thinking they'll stay down. But instead you wake up and realize you were the one who just got embarrassed. That's what happened. That's what's still happening. And who did it happen to? One of the most powerful, loudest, chest-thumping nations in the world. They thought they could isolate India, but they got humiliated instead. See, for decades, India was treated like the side note of history. Like it was just there for back-end tech support, outsourced labor, and a market to sell things to. They wanted India to keep its head down, keep buying, keep depending, and never speak too loud. They thought India would always be grateful just to be in the room. But what they forgot is that India wasn't asking for a seat at their table. India was building its own damn table. Now let's not play dumb here. When they realized India wasn't going to beg for approval, they got nervous. They said, you know what, let's isolate them. Let's squeeze their influence. Let's pull back partnerships. Let's start pushing narratives. All of a sudden, every time India took a stand, there was criticism. Every time India defended its own interest, the headlines turned cold. Every time India made a deal without the so-called global gatekeepers, there was outrage. They didn't like that India wasn't being obedient anymore. But you can't isolate a country that's already learned how to stand alone. What they forgot is India has been standing alone for thousands of years. Before the world knew what globalization was, India was already trading spices, philosophy, astronomy, and ideas that shaped civilization. You think cutting ties in 2025 is going to break a nation that survived colonizers, invasions, partitions, and betrayal? Let me tell you something. When you've been through all that and still standing proud, there ain't no isolation tactic that's going to work. So they made their move. Cut some deals short, backed out of collaborations, started pushing anti-India sentiments in the media, thought it would work. Thought India would get scared, thought India would come crawling back. But no, sir, that didn't happen. What happened instead? India rose even faster. It turned inward not in defeat, but in strategy. It started making what it used to buy. Started selling what it used to import. It didn't wait for validation from the West. It started leading in its own right. Look at how they tried to box India out of the chip supply chain, tried to make India dependent on semiconductors that came from their allies. What did India do? It launched a massive domestic semiconductor mission, started building fab units, started bringing in partners from Japan, Taiwan, and the UAE, built tech alliances that didn't need American approval. Instead of begging, India started offering, and now countries are lining up to be part of India's chip ecosystem. Look at energy. They told India not to buy oil from certain countries. They tried to shame India for choosing deals that made economic sense. What did India do? It doubled down, bought cheaper oil, refined it, and even exported it. You tried to choke the pipeline. India turned it into a profit line. Humiliating. That ain't the word. That's brilliant. Slapping arrogance in the face. You want to talk about military? Oh, they tried that too. Don't buy Russian weapons. They said you'll face consequences. But India didn't blink. India said, we'll buy what we need from who we need when we need, and in the meantime, we'll build our own too. Now, you got missiles like BrahMos scaring half of Asia, fighter jets flying home, built radars, and the world watching every Indian Defense Expo like it's a Super Bowl. They said India was too dependent on foreign arms. Now, India is one of the world's top arms exporters, selling drones, missiles, torpedoes, and defense software to countries that used to laugh at it. Ain't that something? You tried to shame them into silence, and they responded with dominance. That's what humiliation looks like when it's reflected in someone else's success. Even in space, they tried to downplay India's ambitions. Said they weren't ready, mocked their budgets, smirked at their launches. But now what? India lands on the moon's south pole. Sends missions to study the sun. And get this, does it at a cost lower than your Hollywood blockbusters. You tried to isolate them from global aerospace. They just built a rocket highway to the stars. But it wasn't just tech or defense. It was about narrative. They tried to portray India as intolerant, unstable, risky. Used every media trick to distort the picture. But what they didn't understand was this ain't the 1990s. The world's got eyes, ears, and alternatives now. The global south saw what was happening, saw how India was being cornered, and you know what they said. Hold up. If they're treating India like this, what chance do we have? That's when the game changed, because isolating India backfired so bad it turned India into a symbol of resistance. Suddenly, you've got African nations praising India's balanced foreign policy. You've got Middle Eastern nations saying, we want defense ties with New Delhi. You've got Latin America looking for trade agreements with India. It's no longer about East vs. West. It's about sovereign choices. And India is leading that movement. You tried to isolate them, and instead you put the global spotlight on them. Let's talk trade. The idea was if we withdraw deals, they'll fall in line. Now, India started making regional trade agreements. Started trading in local currencies, stopped relying on the dollar for every damn transaction. When America pulled back, India turned to ASEAN, to Africa, to Central Asia, and in that vacuum, it didn't just survive, it thrived. And now the irony is so loud it's deafening. You tried to isolate India, and now your own companies are begging to enter India. Every CEO is flying to New Delhi with a proposal in hand. Every tech giant wants Indian engineers. Every chipmaker wants Indian land. Every app store wants Indian users. You wanted to box them out, but now you're knocking on their door. That's not strategy. That's desperation with a business card. Even in diplomacy, it's been a humiliation of epic proportions. You stopped inviting them to elite tables, and now they're hosting summits of their own. You skipped them in alliances. Now they're forming global coalitions without you. Brescius is growing. The global south is uniting. The voice getting louder in UN forums isn't yours. It's India's. You played checkers. India played chess. Look, when a country stops looking for handouts and starts setting its own standards, that's dangerous to empires. And that's exactly what's happened. India didn't get isolated. It got liberated. And now it's showing the rest of the world how to do the same. You can't isolate a nation that decided to isolate the noise and amplify its own voice. India's humiliation is not in being isolated. The humiliation belongs to the one who thought isolation could still work in a globalized, digital, and multipolar world. That ain't diplomacy. That's delusion. You try to treat them like a junior partner. India moved like a sovereign boss. You expected them to collapse. They turned your pressure into policy reform. You thought they'd panic. They found peace in the pressure. And you know what's really wild? It's not just that India succeeded. It's that they did it with style, with silence, no chest thumping, no drama, just progress, quiet. Confident progress. While you were making headlines, India was making history, and now everyone sees it. The world sees who tried to isolate and who came out isolated. In the end, India ain't waiting for permission anymore. It's choosing its own path. Whether that's in energy, defense, diplomacy, or economics. And here's the final twist. You thought by isolating India, you'd make it desperate. Instead, you made it desirable. You made it attractive. You made it the alternative. That's the ultimate humiliation. Not just being ignored. Not just being wrong, but being the one who unintentionally crowned your biggest critic as the next big leader. So now here we are. The global narrative has flipped. The country you tried to isolate is now the one everybody wants to stand next to. That's not just a power shift. That's a legacy shift. And the next time somebody even thinks about using isolation as a tool, they better remember this. India doesn't fold. It builds. It doesn't react. It responds. It doesn't cry for attention. It commands it, not with noise, but with undeniable progress. Every move to sideline India only made it the center of global gravity. That's the irony the world wasn't ready for. The more they tried to push India out of the room, the more powerful the spotlight on India became. It wasn't even about resistance anymore. It was about presence. India didn't scream for attention. It demanded it by simply showing up, delivering, and refusing to play by someone else's outdated rules. See, when you try to sideline a nation, His, you better be sure that nation needs you more than you need them. But that wasn't the case with India. Not anymore. His, not in this new world where power isn't just measured by bombs or banks, but by brains, bandwidth, and backbone, and India had all three. In fact, his, the world saw it clearer every time someone tried to cut India out of the conversation. Let's go back a bit. His, remember when international forums started leaning more towards exclusive narratives. His, when certain Western alliances were designed to exclude India from key decisions, assuming it would simply follow along like a good subordinate. His, they figured if we don't invite them to the table, they'll come knocking on the door. But India didn't knock. His, India built its own table, and then other nations started pulling up chairs to that table. The so-called elite clubs of global diplomacy thought India would shrink in relevance. But what actually happened was other nations started watching India more closely, especially the ones tired of being dictated to. Especially the ones looking for an example of how to assert themselves without breaking ties, how to stand firm without starting a war. India became that example not by being perfect, but by being unapologetically strategic. When India started buying oil from wherever it made sense despite Western protests, that wasn't defiance, it was clarity. Clarity that its national interest wasn't going to be traded for political approval. And other countries noticed. They said if India can do that, maybe we can too. That's influence. That's gravity. Proportions. You don't need a G7 invite when your decisions reshape energy trade routes and inspire others to follow suit. Now let's talk economy. There was a time when every major Western investment came with conditions. Technology, infrastructure, defense. There were strings attached. But India flipped the script. Instead of accepting handouts, it started demanding partnerships. And not just any partnerships. Ones on equal footing. The world started seeing a confident India that didn't want to be anyone's pawn, but rather a co-author of the global rulebook. And that confidence became contagious. Global tech companies that once overlooked India now saw it as the next frontier, not just for users, but for innovation. When one power tried to undercut India's influence in the semiconductor space, India went ahead and launched its own mission. Not quietly, not rebelliously, but boldly, and soon enough, chipmakers from Taiwan, Japan, and even Europe wanted a piece of what India was building. The center of gravity had shifted. It wasn't just about America or China anymore. It was India pulling economic, diplomatic, and technological weight toward itself. Then came space. Space used to be a playground for 2 or 3 countries. And India, they said India was too budget, too amateur to really matter. But India landed on the moon's south pole when no one else had. They launched solar missions and deep space explorations, not for show, but for science. All of it done at a fraction of the cost, but with precision that shook the room. Suddenly, even NASA and ESA wanted to collaborate. Again, you tried to sideline but ended up leaning in because you can't ignore a nation that accomplishes more with less. You see, there's something powerful about a country that doesn't flinch. When Western think tanks and media began projecting India's fall due to geopolitical neutrality, what did India do? It kept walking. While others picked sides, India picked strategy. While others pushed alliances, India built bridges. It never called itself a superpower, but somehow ended up acting like one. It didn't threaten, didn't flex, it executed. That's what made other nations gravitate toward it. Now even on the military front things have shifted. The idea was to keep India dependent on parts, platforms, doctrines, but India said no more. India started developing indigenous weapons, advanced tech, and now it's not just defending itself, it's exporting. Countries once skeptical of Indian defense tech are now placing orders. You think that happens by chance. That's respect earned. That's gravity doing its thing. You pull others toward you not by yelling, but by standing tall. Even diplomatically, when you look at how India handled global crises, pandemics, wars, economic collapses, it didn't rush to take sides. It offered solutions. It sent vaccines to countries that couldn't afford them. It hosted global summits not as a guest, but as a leader. And while the so-called world leaders were busy debating, India was acting. The world started seeing India not just as an option, but as a necessity. What's wild is how the attempt to sideline India actually became a platform for India's emergence. Every restriction turned into motivation. Every dismissal fueled determination. Every cold shoulder became a lesson in self-reliance. You wanted to sideline them, but they used that silence to sharpen their tools, build their networks, and rise with quiet strength. Even in education and soft power, India became a magnet. Top universities started collaborating with Indian institutions. Indian culture, cinema, spirituality and philosophy began influencing global discourse, not because India marketed it aggressively, but because the world was ready for something real. Authenticity became India's weapon. In a world full of scripted narratives, India's raw, unfiltered journey became magnetic. When tech layoffs stormed through Silicon Valley, where did the world look for engineers, coders, innovators? India. When supply chains broke down, who stepped in with scalable alternatives? India. When global leaders needed a voice of balance, who spoke with both compassion and clarity? India. And when rising nations sought a model that blended growth with dignity, they didn't look west. They looked east toward India. Even regional conflicts showed India's new gravitational pull. Nations began requesting India to mediate, to speak up, to show up. Because neutrality backed by wisdom carries more weight than aggression backed by ego. While others threatened war, India championed dialogue. While others expanded bases, India expanded influence. No boots on the ground, just trust on the table. And let's not forget the diaspora. You tried to paint India as isolated, but somehow Indian origin leaders started leading governments, corporations, and institutions all over the world. That's not isolation. That's integration. That's how gravity works. It doesn't just hold things in. It connects them. India's global presence isn't loud, but it's everywhere. And that's the story the world missed while it was too busy trying to write India off. A story not of rebellion, but of quiet revolution. A story not of outrage, but of outcome. Because India didn't shout to be seen. It worked to be impossible to ignore. And now, after decades of being treated as a supporting actor in a drama dominated by the West, India has stepped onto the global stage, not to follow the script, but to write its own. The attempt to isolate India backfired so completely that it became the very fuel of its elevation. Every pressure became a pivot. Every exclusion became a launch pad. Every snub transformed into a signal that the old rules no longer apply. What was supposed to be a punishment turned into preparation. What was meant to break India only built it stronger. India's rise is not built on borrowing influence. It's built on building substance. From energy to economy, defense to diplomacy, education to innovation. India has reshaped the conversation on what it means to grow with grace, to lead with logic, and to influence without intimidation. It's no longer about power defined by coercion. It's about power defined by contribution. And that's why the world is paying attention, because India didn't chase validation, it chased value. And in doing so, it became invaluable. What once was dismissed as a back office economy is now leading front end revolutions in tech, space, defense, and diplomacy. What was underestimated became undeniable. And the most powerful part, India never needed to copy anyone. It led by being itself. That's what made it magnetic, its refusal to compromise its sovereignty for convenience. Its insistence on making decisions that align with its national interest. Its quiet confidence in standing alone until others came around. Not because India demanded followers, but because its direction created clarity for those who had long felt voiceless in global affairs. India didn't isolate others. It just refused to isolate its own potential. And now the same countries that once questioned India's choices are scrambling to cooperate, to invest, to collaborate, because the world realized this isn't the India of hesitation. This is the India of conviction. And here lies the greatest irony of all. The very powers that tried to push India to the margins have ended up rotating around it. Their strategies fell short. Their assumptions collapsed because they were playing the old game in a new world. But his India was building a new game altogether, where respect isn't given by tradition, but earned by transformation. Where leadership isn't about dominance, but about direction. Where silence isn't weakness, but strength under control. India showed the world that you don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to move with purpose so boldly that the noise fades and the signal shines. So the next time someone tries to use isolation as a tool, let this be the case study. India didn't just survive it. It redefined what success looks like. And as the world now leans in, listens closely, and learns silently, it's clear India didn't just rise. India arrived. And this time, it's not asking for space. It's claiming it with clarity, with courage, and with quiet, unstoppable force.